good afternoon. I'm Leah Powell. I'm the Community Resources and Diversity Manager with the City of Chandler. I've been with the city for it'll be 19 years, actually in October. And I've actually worked for local government for, oh gosh, I guess it's about 30 years now. And when I started with the City of Chandler, one of the things my task was to oversee our youth enhancement program. And I'll talk a little bit specifically about that funding source. So my career with working with our nonprofits in our community goes back to my beginning of my career with the city. So today it's going to be working with funders in the nonprofit community funding in the City of Chandler. Most of what I'll talk about is very specific to our grant and our allocations process, but there are some general tips in there. I can tell you, being on the evaluation end of grants, there are certain things, certain patterns that we see, and I hope to be able to point those out to you and kind of show you, what some of the things to maybe avoid. I know that was one of the questions Brenda's had. If there's anything that really bothers you, like your pet peeves, so I've got those in there. And for those of you, I know there's different levels of grant writing experience here, so for those of you who are grant writers, feel free to interject at any point. I mean, that's how everybody learns, is ideas from each other, so please feel free to interject at any point. Okay. So I'm going to talk about kind of the overview of what we'll talk about today. Is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, again, specific City of Chandler, our general fund grant versus our CDBG home grant. Those are the federal dollars. What's behind each one of those, what our process looks like. The community outreach is a big deal for us. I know Cynthia mentioned for our city, and I'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute. And then kind of future projects, what we're looking to do in the future and that type of thing. So let's start with funding sources. We have general fund and we have CDBG. So general fund is a combination of dollars that are collected through tax dollars, basically. There's a quarter-cent tax that was added years ago that funded the youth enhancement program initially. And so sometimes it's that way, and it's others process that maybe that council has allocated the dollars, and I'll talk to that specifically. And then CDBG is an allocation that we get from the federal government, and it's very specific in what it can be used for. So for the general fund, back in the 1980s, 1987, we had the social service funding. And that was when the city took a look at what the issues were in the community and wanted to provide for those nonprofits that were able to kind of really address the basic needs. So social service funding continues today. It's around $400,000 or so. Back in 1994, there was a teen town hall and a youth town hall, and the community wanted to figure out what was going on with the youth in our community, what were our needs. Ideas like places like ICANN actually came out of that time. There were people like Henry Salinas, that was the founder here of ICANN, that was active in the community and very grassroots, no building or anything at that time. And so people like that, our community leaders, were at this town hall, and they really started to look at what do we need to do for our youth. So the Youth Enhancement Program was created. And the Youth Enhancement Program has got a little bit looser criteria. If you look at that, it serves youth ages 0 through 18. That's it. That's the criteria, the base for what those programs are. So it can be any type of program that serves youth. And we further define that, and you'll see that when we get into it a little bit more. But really, that's the basis of who these funds were intended for. That also kind of started a cultural change in Chandler, too, because the nonprofits were very involved in the creation of the Youth Enhancement Program. So it set the stage for really the way that we operate today, and that is that we have a lot of discussion with our nonprofits. Initially, when the Youth Enhancement Program was created, it was only meant to be seed money. So agencies who received funding could only receive it for 2 years, and that was it. And the second year was going to be 50% of their first year allocation. The idea was just to get those programs going, and then they'd go off and find funding. Well, obviously, for all of you that are in the nonprofit world, you know that that's not so easy. It doesn't quite work like that. And so by the time we got to before year 2 even, everybody realized that's not going to work. We're going to need to change the criteria. So there was some criteria change, and there was a longer term that agencies get funded. And again, we kind of got to that thing of we have good programs that are running in our community, but there aren't enough resources out there to continue to fund them. So the criteria was changed again to a 5-year sliding scale. And during that time is really where the nonprofits were given a voice in Chandler, really truly given a voice. And there were a lot of meetings that took place with the city council and the nonprofits, and the council heard directly from the nonprofits about what is it that you need as nonprofits? And so this whole 5-year sliding scale was created. Then once again, when we got to about year 4 of the 5-year sliding scale, it was again, we have great programs in our community, now we're about to cut them off from funding. And once again, nonprofits were brought back with the council, and this is where we get to today, where we don't have any more of those year restrictions on funding programs. I bring that up because it really is important to understand what our culture is here in Chandler. We feel very strongly about nonprofits are our partners. I've been told by many other communities and grant writers that the city of Chandler operates much more like a foundation than we do as a typical government entity who is allocating funds. You will see that throughout our process, and some of you, and Cassie, you may be probably the one in here that's done the most grant writing with the city, but through our process, the nonprofits have a voice even today. I mean, you'll see when I go through some of the information that we give you when we do our allocations, we give you all the tools we possibly can. The philosophy that I have in my office and I have my staff has is that our job is to get as many viable applications in there. Our job is to help you write a good grant, and then we let our allocations process take care of the rest of figuring out who's going to get funded. But I look at it like our job isn't to be a roadblock. Our job is not to keep secrets. Our job is to really try to help you have a good grant application. And so we try to be as open and transparent as possible with you. And again, I think it's really has set the culture for our community, and why things like Forest City, which I'll talk about later, have been able to grow so much here, because we have the ongoing dialogue with our nonprofits. The other source of funding is Acts of Kindness. Now, Acts of Kindness is through the water bill donations. It was established back in 2000, and it was the idea of giving Chandler residents that opportunity to support their neighbors who might be in need. 50% of the dollars collected go to help with water bills. They go to utility billing, and the money is actually administered through our community action program for the utility billing portion of that. The other 50% of the funds go to programs that help to strengthen the families. So it can be, there's different programs each year. It's not always the same thing, but for an example, this year we're funding adult literacy at the library, the job center at the library. We're funding recreation and athletics for the disabled, to provide opportunities for people with disabilities to participate in Special Olympics, to participate in therapeutic recreation. It helps strengthen the family by providing not only those recreational opportunities, but also the respite for caregivers at times. So programs like that. We have really not done a great job of marketing. I'll be very honest with you. The city has not done a great job of marketing this, but we have a new marketing plan, and we've already embarked on that, and so at the end I will show you that. This last year there was about, we're right around $50,000 that is being collected through this fund. And our goal is to really get those dollars up a lot higher. We need to be able to get more dollars collected. We did open up for City of Chandler employees. They can actually donate through our workplace giving campaign each year, and so we do have employees that donate that way. We hope to someday be able to get businesses that want to donate, because what we can say to businesses, first of all, 100% of your donation goes to nonprofits. We take no administrative overhead on that. It is, any administration of these funds is covered by my budget, basically. And we have an oversight process. We have an allocations process and a monitoring process that lets a business know that these are how the dollars are being used, and that's what we're watching for. When we come out and do the monitoring, we're ensuring that our dollars are being used the way that they were intended. So we want to get that message out to the citizens and to businesses. This is an opportunity to make sure your donation is going where it's supposed to go without having any administrative overhead. There's not a percentage that's coming off or anything. And finally, very small amount of money. This is only $10,000 with the Veterans Transportation, but that's money that council specifically put aside to fund transportation for veterans who are low to moderate income. Things like going to VA appointments, medical appointments, and so we have one of our nonprofits each year that applies for those dollars and provides that. And actually this year we have 2 that are providing those services. All of this together is about, usually range about $1.1, $1.2 million for the general fund. CDBG, I'm going to go through a little bit faster because it's much more technical. But I will tell you, so to receive federal funding, and our CDBG is right about $1.2 million as well. You absolutely have to serve low to moderate income people, and you have to address one of the national objectives. The reason I say that CDBG is so much more difficult is because this all has to be proven. There is quite a bit more of documentation that takes place. The monitoring process looks completely different. There's just a lot more paperwork, and not every organization may have the capacity to take on CDBG dollars. So here are the national objectives. So your clients either have to be income-based, and if you're serving clients that are income-based, that all has to be documented. There have to be paycheck stubs, there have to be copies of bank accounts, for everybody who's in the household that is making money, basically. So that's, again, where all that documentation comes in. If your clientele themselves are not in that category, there's area-based. Area-based is actually difficult in itself too, because we only have certain census tracts that will qualify as an area that's low to moderate income. So not a lot of projects will qualify based on that. There are certain clienteles, presumed benefit, that are automatically considered. Homeless are considered low to moderate income immediately. Elderly, there's a little bit of a caveat there, but for the most part, most programs that would serve seniors would qualify as a presumed benefit. Now there have been some exceptions in maybe a higher economic area where that may come into play a little bit. So persons with disabilities, abused or neglected children, DV victims, those programs will qualify based on the type of program it is versus having to do, it's not that they still don't have to do some of that qualification on the person, but it's a presumed clientele. So a little bit more, it's definitely trickier and a little bit more technical. Do you have a question?
Yes, the fact that you have to prove their income, would they accept, like, if we're going through the people we're helping our school children, if their parents if they're on free lunch program or what have you, which has already been approved, will that be enough?
No. And that's why you really have to have the capacity to have these funds. What would be required, and again, it depends on your exact service, but most likely what would be required is that you're actually documenting, you're taking paycheck stubs of the parents, that you're looking at, that you're doing that physical documentation, and in your files, you can show that you documented that that family was a low-income family.
Even if they're referred through the school, you still have to do that, even though the school has proven that they're.
Yes. Now, again, there may be some exceptions if it's a homeless family, but the reason is that it's not necessarily a standard across the board of who qualifies for different programs. So even if you look at homeless, for example, the definition from a school as to a homeless child is different than the definition of homeless as it pertains to somebody on the street. And so some of those things come into play, but you have to have all that documentation. Now, again, if the school was in an area that was a low to moderate income area, the area itself qualified, then it might be a little bit different.
What happens if you don't document well enough or you don't have that proof? What happens in the end?
Most likely, you're not going to get funded to begin with if you don't show that you have that type of documentation system. So you probably won't get the money anyway.
So you have to show it at the beginning.
You show it at the beginning. But at the same time, CDBG is on reimbursement basis, so you would have to provide the appropriate documentation to even get the funding up front. General fund, we do differently. General fund, except for new programs, and any programs that we've had some challenges with, for the most part, general fund programs will get their allocations up front. So we will, depending on how much money you're getting and depending how long you've been funded by us, you may get anywhere from 1 to 4 checks a year. And for general fund programs, most of our programs will get a check in July. So you get it right off the bat. We try to do that because sometimes we know that a lot of programs need that seed money to get going. I know a lot of small nonprofits or all volunteer nonprofits may be running almost on a day-to-day basis, and they need those dollars to get those programs off the ground. So we treat that a little bit differently. We do have some exceptions in there, though. We have, like I said, if there's a program that we've had some challenges with in the past, we may switch them off at any point and put them onto reimbursement. New programs, we're kind of taking another look at that. It's something our Housing and Human Services Commission will be taking a look at actually at their next meeting. We may be making some changes that we may do something a little bit different with brand new programs that have never been established, not necessarily new to our funding, but new period.
Can I ask, are they all people oriented or can you do any animal oriented? services, like
Only-
pet
yeah.
food, to get food to low-income people or anything like that for their pets, so they're not feeding their own food to their pets, you know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah, that's a good question. First of all, you have to know I'm a huge animal lover. I have rescued dogs, and I want to talk to you because we want to adopt another one. So know that up front, huge, and that's what when I retire, everybody keeps saying, you're going to be a consultant, right grants? No, I want to become a dog trainer and work with people who can't afford to have dog trainers. So that's my goal. But total side note, so know that I'm a big animal lover. Right now, we fund the Dogs for Vets program, which provides service animals for veterans with disabilities. We fund a couple food banks, and I do know the food banks will take donations in of dog food and things like that. We haven't actually had that specific discussion, and you raise a good point, because I know what you're saying about that if you provide with the correct dog food, a person may not be taking their own food. And that's a really good point. We have never discussed that.
There's actually, she's out at Chandler, she's Chandler based, it's the Good Dog Food Bank. All she does is collect food, and she has everything from prescription type diet plans.
Oh, really? Okay.
Ferret, rabbit, cat, dog, horse, she's had access to everything. And she works to get the food into the hands of families that don't have the food to fund to take care of their own animals, to prevent them from having to give them up perhaps, which puts a strain on the county shelters. She has resources that she's supplied to them even for low-cost veterinary care. So they've come to her. So she builds a rapport with them on a lot of different levels. But her goal is always working with elderly, low-income people about to lose their homes, who've lost a job, and might need 8 weeks or so of food to get them through while they get back on their feet. So she's actually she's based out of Chandler. So I don't know if she would fall into that, or somebody you'd want to approach to see if she'd fit under that.
Definitely somebody I'd want to talk to, because part of my job is I serve as the homeless coordinator for our community. And we have a lot of either homeless or about to be homeless people who have pets. And the pets unfortunately become a barrier when that person is getting ready to be evicted out of someplace. And so I know there's some organizations that will work with fostering for a short time. I actually fostered a dog and a cat for a homeless family we're working with for 6 months. So I know there are people out there that will foster, but the prescriptions and the medicine became an issue even in that situation too. So that would be a good resource, because getting into shelter or whatever. So thanks. That's I definitely want to talk to you afterwards. And we'll have to kind of take a look at that, because it is again working with homeless. I know that people will choose to be with their pet and be on the street rather than give up that pet. And I like I said, I get it. I totally understand.
Can I just say that that's an example of a helping hand project that you get to push out to the community, and any organization that can help or any individual that can help foster that animal short term would then know to contact you.
Yeah, that'd be great. So those are great. I definitely want to talk to you afterwards. I wrote down your information too, so good. Any other questions on this piece of it? I'll get a little bit more into kind of the priorities that we fund. Okay. So general fund, here are more specifics on the priorities. So what we do, and I showed you there's those different funding sources, but when we do the allocations, we don't rate the applications based on the funding source. We rate them based on what we consider population groups. So we have the youth programs, we have the families in crisis, and we have special populations. Now I will tell you, because the Youth Enhancement Program, the YEP, is the largest pot of money, it'll fund all of the youth programs, and some of those dollars will actually fund programs that are families in crisis that are youth-based, or special populations that are youth-based. So those dollars kind of get spread across the three. And so we have really what we feel are key priorities, key focus areas under each of these. So you see with youth, it's education, health, prevention, intervention. Families in crisis, people in the crisis needs. This is where our homeless programs will fall under, and we've been doing a lot more with homelessness here in our community. And then our special populations, it's people with disabilities, it's seniors, and it's veterans who fall into this category here. So these are our priorities for the general fund. For CDBG, again, it goes very specific back to those activities that are part of what HUD tells you can do, the eligible activities. So you see, again, homelessness is here. Fair housing programs, the city is mandated to do fair housing programs if we're going to accept any CDBG money or any home money. So that's something that we have to carve off the top of our CDBG, because it's really important that we do fair housing. Capital, these are things like, it could be the infrastructure projects like you see here, or city. Most of this is probably gonna be city-owned property, but there are exceptions to that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So things like doing park improvements. We are anticipating there will be an application in for the expansion of our senior center this next year, things like that. We do other what is considered public facilities. So Chandler Christian Community Center was a project that had an expansion that just ended this last fiscal year. They were funded for an expansion there. That is an example of a nonprofit who can receive capital dollars. But again, this gets really tricky. Chandler Christian Community Center qualifies because one, they're in an area that qualifies, that's low to moderate income, and two, their clientele is low to moderate income. So they qualify for that capital project. Beyond that, we don't get a whole lot of other requests. Homeless would be the other thing. We've had requests in the past from A New Leaf for the men's shelter, and we've had requests from CAS and things like that. So it's somewhat limited because of our geography and the programs that we have in our community in relation to that geography. There just aren't a lot of those capital projects for nonprofits. And housing activities, you'll see there's a combination. We do housing activities with our CDBG funding, and we have a special funding source, home, which has to be housing activities. This source of money is federal money that comes through Maricopa County. We're part of a consortium with other cities, and again, it has to go for housing. One of the things I wanted to point out, though, is our tenant-based rental assistance program. This is a new program we started, about 2 years now. And this is a program where we've taken the chronically homeless, it's kind of a housing first model. And we've taken our most chronic homeless off the street, put them into apartments. We can pay up to 24 months rent, and we have intensive case management with it. And so we just started on year 3 of that program. Currently, Chandler Christian Community Center just became our new provider in this, and so they do the case management for the homeless individuals and families. And the idea behind that intensive case management is that the person who's doing the case management really is kind of taking care of every need. For some people, it's a matter of readjusting to living indoors, and so it's kind of almost skilled training again, those living skills. For some, it may be getting them to doctor's appointments, getting them signed up for benefits that they have coming to them. So all of those type of things. So like this program, we pay the rent and utilities out of this fund, and we pay for that person, that case manager, out of our public service fund. So that's how kind of an idea of how those work together. But again, this is the federal side, much more challenging. So, I wanted to talk to you about what are the requirements for each type of funding. So on your thing, you'll see these basic tips. Do you qualify? Very first thing you want to take a look at is, do you qualify? Especially if you're trying to decide what you're going to apply for. So for our general fund, you have to be a 501c3. There's audits, and depending on what your finances are each year, you may have to do financial statements versus an audit. We don't necessarily require audits for anybody. I think our threshold is $250,000. So if you're under $250,000, we require financial statements. We have a cap on administrative costs, 20%. And this is something I would say to new grant writers. When you're looking at places that have caps on administrative costs, really look at what it is that you want to use those dollars for. Many times we have people who think it's an administrative cost that it's not. So let me give you an example. If, let's use ICANN as an example. If we're paying, say they didn't own it, they were renting it. And so ICANN was renting the space right here. They might think, oh, well, this is where our office is, this is administrative cost. If you're running a program out of here and the kids are in this classroom, this is a program delivery cost. This is not an administrative cost.
So are the lights in this classroom?
Exactly.
People think lights are administrative costs.
Exactly, and they're not. Now, if they had an office building that is in a completely different place, they're not running any programs out of there, it's strictly office, that's an administrative cost, and a percentage could go towards that, but it's capped at 20%. Same thing when it comes to positions, and this is probably where it gets even trickier. If you're a small nonprofit and you have a director and maybe one other paid staff, lots of times people assume, well, it's the director, so it's administrative cost. If that director is in there running the program, they're out there playing soccer with the kids, they're the soccer coach, that's a program delivery. That's not an administrative cost. So be very careful with that. And there's so many times that I'll look at applications and I'll think, no, you could ask for more because this is not administrative cost. For Chandler dollars, it has to be 100% Chandler residents. So that's a caveat for us. Again, CDBG, not even gonna go into all this, but just know there's things like debarment that has to be looked at, conflict of interest, their record keeping, and for CDBG audits, they will go in and they'll look to make sure that you have fair housing posters on the wall, and you have your, that you apply with the E-Verify. I mean, it gets very technical, so there's a whole lot longer list on that one. Okay, let's talk about timeline. This is extremely important. Yes?
Yes, so if you're a Tempe-based nonprofit, but your board member is a Chandler resident, then can you still apply?
So you have to serve Chandler residents. You could be,
Yeah, as long as you're serving
right, as
Chandler
long as you are
residents.
serving Chandler residents, absolutely. Now,
Okay, so you don't have to be a Chandler resident, as long as you're serving.
serving Chandler residents. Now, let's say you had a program that was almost identical to another program in Chandler, and that program was based in Chandler, the other program, there's a good chance that that program's gonna get funded over you. I mean, there could be that almost preference given. But if you're, you know, service, and homeless is a great example. We have shelter here for homeless adults. We don't have shelter for homeless families. So we know we're going to be funding programs that are not located in Chandler, but they still have to make sure they're serving Chandler residents. And that may also be an example of a program where we may put that one on reimbursement. Because of the central screening, they don't necessarily have control over who's coming into the shelter. So that could be one that we're gonna say, okay, we're gonna put on reimbursement. When you serve Chandler residents, then we'll reimburse you for it.
I have a
Yes.
question, because I stepped out and know if you covered it or not. If you have a church that has a 501c3 and they wanted to use that for servicing the community to get funding for a community program like help with after-school program with the Chandler Unified School District, would they be barred from doing that since it's religious?
No, so what happens if, we have a question on our application that says, are you a faith-based organization? So let me give you an example of somebody who might say yes to that, YMCA. That's in their core who they are. We know, though, that they're not out there proselytizing. We're gonna do the same thing with the church. Yes, I'm a faith-based organization. If it's a church, we're gonna send it to our legal department to take a look at the activity. I'll give you another example. Veterans Transportation is out of Manna Ministries, and they are absolutely 100% faith-based. But they know that on their van, they can't have anything that is, you know, promoting the religion. It's about the van that picks up the veteran that takes them to the appointment. And so they know that they have to watch those boundaries. Through the years, we've only had, I would say, one or two that have crossed that line that it couldn't be separated enough. When they have things like Bible study as being a part of a self-sufficiency plan or something to that, or a part of case management, we can't do that. So as long as the activity is not really about promoting the faith, it's tutoring, it's mentoring, it's whatever, then it probably would be eligible. But our legal department will take a look at it. So, it's a good question. Timeline. So October is when our applications are available. We will probably have this year's application available around October 21st is kind of the date we're looking at. We'll be finalizing that in September. November, our applications are due, probably either right before or right after Thanksgiving. December, we go into staff reviews. So when myself and my staff were looking at these applications, what we are looking for is, one, is it a complete application? Two, do we see any major problems that we either need you to clarify because it just can't even move further in the process without getting it resolved, or these are things that we need to point out to the allocations panel. Then in January through March, it goes to our funding panels. In Chandler, we use a Housing and Human Services Commission, which is an 11-member body appointed by the mayor and council. They are responsible for, one of their many responsibilities is the oversight of the funding allocations. We also include panel members, community members. So we have 20 people that actually review all the applications. They're divided into the 3 population groups that you saw for general fund, plus 1 for the federal funding. And so those are it's a combination of Housing and Human Service Commission members along with other really kind of community experts. So example, police and fire will probably serve, they typically serve out of families in crisis. We have teachers that serve on the youth panels, that type of thing. We have youth actually that serve on the youth panel. We always have at least 2 youth that serve on that panel. Because we want to make sure we're getting a well-rounded view of it, get a lot of input. So they do that January through March. And to kind of give you an idea, we usually get at least 50 to 60 applications, sometimes more. April through June, we actually are at different stages. So the way it works for the federal funding is it's part of an annual plan that we have to do for HUD every year, and it goes to council for a public hearing, and that's in April when all that takes place, and it gets adopted by council. For the general fund, what we do is we will send out initial allocations, recommendations to all the agencies. Then you're given an opportunity to come in, and the Housing and Human Services Commission has a public hearing, and if you need, if you want to say something, you're welcome to do that. And then it goes to a final recommendation by the Housing and Human Service Commission, and then goes to council for approval. And so again, for the federal funding, that goes to council for approval in April. For the general fund, it doesn't go, April, May usually for federal. General fund, it doesn't go until our budget itself is approved in June. For both funds, they start July 1. So that's when I was talking about earlier that a lot of organizations will get their check in July, that's because our funding starts in July 1. So another basic tip, know the timeline. And know the timeline, especially when it comes to that due date. We run ours through EC Impact, which is a system that the United Way houses. And, a big tip, don't wait till the day before even to submit, because you never know when your computer's gonna crash. Every year, there are at least 1 or 2 agencies that are calling us at 2 o'clock on the day they're due. We make them do it 4, not at 5, I will tell you that too. Actually, I think this last year we did noon, we keep backing it down, that are calling and my computer just crashed. Don't wait, do not wait. Know that timeline well and give yourself extra time. And it's really sad when you see an agency that's been funded for several years fail to get an application in because their computer crashed or they just didn't plan accordingly. Okay, so I will take you through this kind of quickly. When you come to an orientation, and I would encourage everyone who wants to apply for funding to come, you're going to get a book that looks like this. You can see that mine says FY 16-17 edits. From day 1 that we started printing this book, I started making edits for this next year. So we always are trying to change and make our applications better. So you're going to get a book that looks like this. It will walk you through it'll walk you through the criteria. It's going to walk you through, we even have bios on who the HHSC members are. It's going to walk you through how we make the payments to you, agency tours, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's going to walk you through the applications. And we even go so far as to give you tips throughout this book. So you will see things that like this gray box that says tip, where we're basically telling you exactly what we want to see in an answer. These are the things you should keep in mind. We have examples in here. This is an example of a way to answer a question. So this book is extremely helpful. There's one other piece that I don't think a lot of funders do, and that would be this piece back here. Get it open. Okay. We give you the evaluation criteria. This is the exact document that the funding panel is looking at when they read your application. So go to the orientation. This book is like gold if you're writing a grant. I cannot tell you that enough. So what's in our application? Well, first we're going to be looking at the agency itself. We want to, yes?
I'm just gonna say, would you please let the rest of the groups in the state of Arizona know about that? And share it, please. We could use that in a lot of places.
Well, and that's where I say, like, we really are more like a foundation, and we really feel so strongly about our nonprofits. And so we actually hired a consultant to redo our whole grant application process several years ago, and she and I worked together. And this is one of the things we came up with is, like, let's make sure they see the evaluation criteria. So yes, well, thank you for that. We'll try to share. And I'll go through this quickly, because when you fill out the application is when you're going to look at it. But basically, we want to know about your agency background. We're looking for, what is your capacity like? How stable an organization are you? How much is your board engaged? In Chandler, that's a big question. The allocations panel always really gets into the board engagement piece of it a lot. The financial piece of it, your agency budget, not necessarily your program, sometimes they're one and the same, but your agency budget. Then we get into your program. How much money are you asking for? How are you going to use it? This is where we get into narrative of your goals, and I'm going to show you a little bit on that in a few slides too. But this is really kind of the meat of what you're doing. And here's another basic tip. Read the entire application before you begin. Again, you've got it. You have it 100%. Even though you're filling it out online, you've got
some of them won't let you go on to the next page, and I don't get it in hard copy. And so I want to know what the next question is on the next page. I write AAA on the answer block, and then I'll go to the next page and save and next, just because I want to see it before. And actually, I copy and paste it into a Word document, write it all out
That's
into a Word document, let my boss see it, and then submit it. So
Yeah, and we recommend that too. EC Impact doesn't have spell check in it, so we recommend do it in Word, save. Spell check, please, and then cut and paste it into it. And ours will, if you leave a question blank for most of the questions, every once in a while there's one that sneaks in there that doesn't have this, you have to put something, you have to put like a 0 or some type of character in to be able to submit the whole thing. You get funded. We're gonna go out and monitor you, and the reason I want to point this out is because it ties back into the application. You're gonna have a midterm report, it's fairly easy, final report, both of those are in here, so you know exactly what you're reporting on. And then we do agency tours where we go out and see how the dollar's being used. Now, I can tell you that an application can look stellar on paper, and we have gone and done an agency tour, and all these red flags came up, and we've had problems. We have had just the opposite. We know that we have a gamut of people who have never written a grant in their life, they have no paid staff, it's 100% volunteer, to those that are national organizations with professional grant writers. And we try the best we can to kind of make this one document, this one process that's gonna work for everybody. So sometimes we have applications on paper that, you know, they look like they're struggling, and you go out there and you see this huge impact, and there's all these kids participating, and you know they're making a difference in the community. And so when the agencies, or when the allocations panel is looking at this, we talk about the scores just a starting point for discussion, because we take all of this into account. Every application that's been funded by us before gets a report card. Everybody gets one, even if you haven't been funded. If we found red flags within your application, or we know something about your organization in the community, something like that, we will put it in a report card, and the allocations process actually takes a look at those report cards. It's usually more suggestions for them about, you might want to ask them a question about this kind of thing. But if there's something that's been a problem, it's going to be in that report card. And panel members go on these agency tours. It's not just staff, it's the panel members that go with us. So, is it worth it? Why did that come back? Okay, that wasn't supposed to be, but I guess again, that I think was supposed to say something different. So basically, keep all of this in mind. You know, I guess maybe it does go back to it, because is it worth it? Are you capable of doing all of this? It's not that much for general fund, honestly, I have to be honest. CDBG, completely different ballgame. But for general fund, it's not that intense, but you do have to be able to do all that to apply. Okay, this is the rest of the general fund application. These are some of the other things. There's the demographics, and we won't get into all that. There is a bonus point question about participation with the city, and I will cover that later. Although I do want to point out program budget, this is one that people tend to fill out incorrectly. Please look at how this works. We want secured funding, we want to know what's pending, we want your budget to balance, number one thing, make sure your budget balances. That I will point out, because that's really important. Okay, tips for good writing. Short sentences, and I'm going to expand on that in a minute. Simple language, no jargon. Working for government, I can tell you we're probably the worst when it comes to acronyms, but we got to watch that in an application, because you got to remember that the people reading it may know, maybe an expert in their field, but they may not be an expert on your agency, and you may use some term that nobody else is using and they're not familiar with it. Get to the point. We've had some that gave us a novel. We actually have character limits on questions like now because of things like that, so it's better to get to your point. Clear, concrete, vivid language, clear language especially. Right to express, not to impress. There's like be a lot of flowery words, but if it doesn't really tell us what you're doing, not going to help. And don't use special type, and there's one exception I will talk about in a minute, but don't give us all this bolded, italics, crazy kind of things. And again, think about this when you're just like, who will write your application? That's a key component. Who's writing it? These are things that they need to keep in mind, things that they need to be good at. They need to be able to write clear and concisely. Okay, this is the number one tip. It's not in your PowerPoint, because this is the whole point reason you came today. This is going to make you a stellar grant writer. It's so important that I didn't put it in there because I want all of your attention. Are you ready? This is the whole reason for being here today. Answer the question. It seems so basic. gonna show you in a minute some things that I'll say. Don't skip questions, answer the question. That's the basic tip I can tell you is look at what's being asked and answer the question. Let me show you some things. Here's some examples. This is from not the 14, 15, 16 applications, but 14, 15. Explain the activities. That's the answer.
Oh my gosh.
Oh wait, it gets better. Now I'm going to go back for a minute. I'll tell you in a minute why that's such a short question to explain the activities. Here's another question. Look at them. We're looking for approach, the issue, the best practices, innovation, long-term benefits, the community. Okay, let me tell you first of all, we didn't write these questions because we wanted the exact same answer. And second of all, the answer to 416 wasn't a very good answer to begin with. So that really didn't, not only did they do themselves a disservice by not answering the question, their answer to 416 wasn't any good anyway. So don't ever do that. Don't, if I'm asking, and even if it seems redundant, then that's when you need to pick up the phone and say, can I get more clarification on what you're looking at, or look for your tip in the book. The reason that was explain the activities was a short thing is because it was part of a series of questions. It was all about what are your program goals? And what we found is if we asked that in just a big question, people weren't getting it. So we started breaking it down. Okay, what's your timeline? What are your activities? You start with your goals, your outcomes, your activities. And so it was part of a series of questions. And then explain why you're doing it this way. And those are the answers we got. So,
Even if you feel like the answer is the same one as above, I just reword it in a different way. And so then there's an answer there.
exactly. And like I said, you have the opportunity to call us and say, I'm not getting how these two are different. Or look it back in the book. You've got the evaluation. On that evaluation tool in the back, it tells you exactly what questions relate to which evaluation questions. Look at what they're evaluating on, and maybe that's the clue of what's a little bit different here. This is another one. Explain the activities. This might be this is a good way of answering this one. So this is where I was going to talk a little bit too about character. Okay, so look at this, weekly mentoring, and they tell us what that involves. Quarterly group events, so we've got weekly, we've got quarterly, and this is what all Chandler Youth will do. And then they give us their 5 key areas. Very clear to me what type of activities this program is doing. Now notice, they were able to use bullets and numbering. You can do that in the application. This is really easy for me to go back, and it's really easy for our readers as our allocation panel members are looking at things, and they're like, wait, what do they do each week? Oh, weekly mentoring, it's right there. It tells me what it is. So you can use bullets in our application. You may not be able to in all, and I would encourage people to do that. So here's another one. This number of volunteers utilize your program. This is from this year. None currently. There's a better way to say that. Oops, where'd it go? Okay. Although we are not currently using volunteers, so it's true, you don't use volunteers. That's a true statement. We want you to be honest. The board, oh, that's a decision-making body. That's somebody who has the ability to implement something. Oh, implementing, that's an action word. Maybe that word's discussing. Maybe you're not at the implementing stage. A new volunteer program, it's a new program. In January, you told me when. So even if you're writing this and you think, wow, I hadn't thought about doing this, we should be doing that. Maybe we should put this on the agenda for the next board meeting to discuss. You could say, although we are currently not doing this, the board will be discussing this in the fall or something, or and if you be more specific in April, whatever. But see the difference between none currently and writing it this way? Gotta be honest, I mean, if it's not something you're going to do, then it's not something you're going to do. But this one is a follow-up. So during our process, when we're looking, when the agency or the allocation panel is looking at your applications, they will ask follow-up questions for clarification. So this was actually a follow-up question that was asked of the program. Now, some key things here. How do you partner with Operation Back to School Chandler and Back to School Clothing Drive? 2 very specific programs, right? Here's the answer we got. And I put things in blue because I was trying not to make it obvious who this agency was, so I put it in blue. I changed the name to it. So you get this explanation of the school time, and it was started in 1908, and we do this and that, and we recently had a request from the school about this and that, and we have had years of enjoyment working with schools and this and that. Not once did they mention the 2 programs I specifically asked them about.
They didn't answer the question.
They didn't answer the question, and if you're getting a question that's specific, you should go back and do research on what is Operation Back to School Chandler and what is it. And the reason is because, again, like I said in Chandler, for us, the collaboration and the partnerships, which will be on the next slides, are so important. So if we're taking the time to ask you this specific question, you need to do the research and find out what in the world we're talking about. And that brings up another tip. So who will edit? Editing is more than just the grammar. Editing is making sure that that question is asked. Editing should be done by somebody who understands what your organization does. It should be done whether it's a board member maybe that's been around for a while. Your editing needs to be more than just grammar. It really needs to make a sense as to what it is that you do. Are you telling your story in here? And it's important, especially when you're limited on characters. Okay, so community outreach. And I want to touch on this because, again, we get bonus points for it. So Forest City Chandler, there's these brochures here that I think Cynthia brought, and I have some here too. Forest City Chandler is where a lot of our programs are working out of this now. So the purpose of Forest City is to bring together the faith community with nonprofits and other resources in the community. And everybody has come together to really maximize what they're doing. And so we'll talk, like Operation Back to School is a prime example. Excuse me. Instead of everybody doing their own backpack drive, we have a huge back to school event now in Chandler, where we encourage any of the agencies that are collecting backpacks, whether that's a business or a faith organization, and all the agencies that are distributing. ICANN, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, the Care Center, they're all part of this. And we do the backpacks, we actually do haircuts now, we give out uniform shirts, we give out shoes. We have a nonprofit fair where there's all the services that are in there for the community. So it's easy to find that on the web. You can look up if somebody, we'll see a question in our application that says, do you participate with Forest City, Operation Back to School, Early Literacy Program? We put them all out there for you. You can go on the website and find out about all of this.
Can I ask you, has
yes.
that already taken place?
Operation Back to School was, yes, we just finished, it was in July, but we'll start planning for it again come January. So.
Because in the future, we'd love to put low-cost spay and neuter information.
Oh, that's a
in
great
those
idea.
backpacks.
See, that'd be a good table to have there, absolutely, great. This Chandler Nonprofit Coalition is now under the umbrella of Forest City, and this is an opportunity for nonprofits to come together. It started out as an opportunity really for nonprofits to kind of come together for their executive directors to network and everything. It's kind of advanced now in the years, and so this is where you see these type of programs, the Operation Back to School. Holiday drives are agencies that give out everything at the holiday. They share lists. They found that when they started sharing lists, there was about a 40% duplication. Because again, what we want to do is we want to reduce the duplication so we can do more with our resources. So these are some of the type of things that fall under that category, but again, it's under the Forest City umbrella. Our homeless initiatives, I talked to you that we have a tenant-based rental assistance. We have an iHelp program where our homeless go to a different faith-based organization each night. Chandler Christian Community Center administers that program. They're given a hot meal, a place to sleep, breakfast, Zap lunch the next day. It's all done by volunteer resources, the volunteer church, it's the volunteer food, and the group's cooking the food. So there's very little overhead in that. So those are kind of the things that why our community feels so strongly about this partnership and about our work with our nonprofits, because we've had programs come out of this now. We're demonstrating that we really can do more together. We have Make a Difference Day, which is a big volunteer day. And we have Let's Pull Together that happens in the spring, where we have groups that'll pull weeds for seniors and people who are disabled and things like that. Future of that, here, is maximizing opportunities and resources effectively. So we have a quarterly breakfast, and our next breakfast is on August 27th. If anybody's working with seniors, that's going to be the topic. When we started everything for the homeless, it came out of this initiative. It was, topics that came up at our breakfast. We started talking about it. We created the iHelp program. We created a tenant-based rental assistance program. All of those are programs that are actually running now and funded. Because it came from this, it came from these discussions. So if you're working with anybody who's a senior, I would encourage you to go to that next breakfast. And if you want to know what's going on with Forest City, we have a newsletter, an e-blast that we send out about every 3 to 4 weeks. And we'll put information for the nonprofits on there too. But we kind of let you know what big projects are going on. So that's something that's important. So if you're going to look at getting funding, I would encourage you to sign up or to go to a Forest City breakfast. They're free breakfast. And the reason is because it's a great networking opportunity. And you're going to see that we put a lot of emphasis on collaboration here, and this is your opportunity to get tapped into that collaboration, is through this. So We do have a website, forestcity.org. Chandler's not the only community with this, but I think ours is probably the most active of all the communities. And collaborations, we do have special funding for collaborations. One agency, both have to be 501c3, one agency will act as the fiscal agent. And when we say collaboration, we mean true collaboration. We don't just mean that I'm gonna come over to ICANN's building and use it once a week. It has to be that program was developed, or at least two programs came together with the idea of both agencies being very active in the goals and the outcomes. And we have a special application that speaks to that part. So we really expect both agencies to be part of the decision making. One will be the primary fiscal agent, but both of them have to be part of that decision making and that development of the program. So that's we stress that quite a bit. And AOK, like I said, we have a new marketing plan. Here's our new logo. There's a new one. It finally got updated after all these years. So the goal will be to get out in the community more with this and hopefully be able to increase those donations, which can then turn around and come back to you. So if you ever have the opportunity to promote this, or if you have somebody who's looking for something else to donate other than your organization, feel free to share information about the AOK program with them. And I just want to make sure I left time for questions, so thank you. So maybe just any additional questions? Yes.
I was a little confused on the orientation and the application, which comes first.
Oh, okay. Orientation is when you get the application. So the day that we release it all together. So when
So
we
you go online and apply first?
No, we'll have an orientation meeting, which you'll get this book, and that day will be the day that you can start getting online to have access. Now, if you don't already use the EC Impact System, you'll have to get set up, but we'll take care of it that day. And typically, about 2 weeks before the orientation, we will send an email out for those who are not on the EC Impact System. There's a form that you can fill out and get back to us so that by the time this day comes, you will have access to it. But that's the first day that the application itself is available online, and that's the day that we walk you through the application. We typically hold it in our council chambers, and we'll do a session in the morning. This next year, this October really, for this next funding cycle, it looks like we may be doing something mandatory for new agencies that have not applied for funding before, or not even necessarily to apply for funding. It's really more for those new agencies that have not been established that long. We've been kind of looking at that. It could be agencies that have been established that haven't applied for funding. We're still kind of working out the details. But our Housing and Human Services Commission really wants us to do an extra session with somebody who's new to the system. So we're still defining what new means, though.
So how would you be aware of what's going on?
Well, so we will announce through, if you're in the EC Impact System, you automatically get an email. There's like 6,000 emails in that system. If you're on the Forest City newsletter, you automatically get blasted there. You'll get an email list. We have a list of nonprofits who have contacted us or who have received funding in the past. We also do a press release, so it's typically in the newspaper as well. And on our website, of course. Any other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to speak to the timeline. On our calendar of events, it has grants and the timeline of when they're coming due.
Oh, good. That would
So
be
it
great.
can kind of be a prompt for people to help them organize themselves. The other thing is we're having a crowdsourcing page for your best tips for grant writing, common mistakes, so that experts can kind of download their best tips for all the nonprofits to be able to see. And the final thing I just wanted to say is we're having a meeting soon about all those agencies that are providing food for people and food for animals. I'm trying to get everybody together so we can use our same channels and overlap. So that's coming in October, so if you're interested in that.
We've even done that here in Chandler because we have different food banks, and we've actually had a couple times where it's just the food banks have met with us and to talk about how everybody's working together. And we actually had a new food bank come in, and they really needed some help, and so it was great to know that there was these experts in the community that were doing this work already. And again, that's kind of where the city, we see ourselves as that facilitator of bringing this new person in with these others who have been experts so that he can learn from what they were doing.
And what we'd love to do at these meetings, and you do a little short presentation on what your organization does and what your process is, so everybody's aware and can refer better.
And just so you don't forget, I printed this one out for you especially.
for Happy New Year.